Thanks. So it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to talk with you and meet with you and practice with you. And as I said, my name is Mark Matheson. I live in Inverness, which is out near Point Reyes Station, or the other side of Point Reyes Station. And I came to the Dharma in 1975. Actually, in college, I went to college in Prescott, Arizona, near the Navajo Reservation, and the college has or at that time, had an arrangement with the Navajo Reservation that Navajo kids could come at reduced tuition. So I met up with three Navajo guys, Chimi, Dorje, and Wangdu, and was hanging out with them in my first year of college. I had studied Asian Studies in high school in Palo Alto. I was going to grow up and be an Asian Studies professor. Took Chinese, studied, my love was the Tang Dynasty of China, which is the flourishing of ancient Chinese civilization. And so I went off to college and was hanging out with these Navajo guys, and after 6 months my Chinese professor said, "How come you're always with those Tibetans?" And I said, "What Tibetans?" And he said, "Chimi, Wangdu, and Dorje are Tibetans, they're not Navajos." and so that was the first year of college. Second year, or the summer after the first year of college, I ended up getting a job on a dairy farm in Switzerland. And so I was there and found out that Dorje was in Switzerland. So I went to visit with him, and his brother was the abbot of a small Tibetan monastery near Zurich. And Dorje knew that I was interested in the history and the culture of Tibet. And that first year of college really exposed me, both in class and outside of class, to Tibetan culture. And the thing that kind of opened my heart to Buddhism was riding with Wangdu on his motorcycle on a really hot day. And in those days, the campus was outside of town. It was out in the high desert. Part of the curriculum of Prescott College in those days was the Outward Bound program. So they wanted students to feel independent and that they could actually survive in the wilderness. So we had a campus outside of town. We were riding along in the motorcycle, and I see, as we're riding along, we pass a little dead bird by the side of the road. And Wangdu immediately turns around and drives back. And the bird is still alive. And Wangdu very gently lifts up this little bird and just opens his shirt. He didn't have a t-shirt on, just opens his shirt and drops the bird inside his pouch. And we go back to his dorm room. And by the time we get back, the bird has died. And so he burns a little juniper, and he just stands very quietly in front of the bird. And just really something in me broke open when that happened. So then I ended up in Switzerland, and Dorje's brother was the head of this monastery. And Dorje said, "Well, you know, if you write a letter to my brother, they'll probably let you come live at the monastery and study there." And later I found out it was only a research institute for all these great men that I'd heard of who were studying Tibet, Westerners who were studying Tibet, and I got to stay there at the Tibetan rate, which I think in those days was about 25 cents a day for room and board. And I studied a Tibetan language. I was very interested in the language, and I taught English to the cook, the Tibetan cook who was there, and I made friends. The Dalai Lama had a representative in Europe who lived at the monastery, and I became his friend, and just sort of jumped right in to the whole monastic scene. Thought briefly about becoming a monk, but as a gay man I wasn't really interested in being celibate. But the tradition really meant a lot to me. So I was there for 3 months, and then came back here to the Bay Area, studied with a Tibetan teacher in Berkeley named Tartang Tolku. And then, as I said earlier, in 1974, I was living in Los Altos and heard about this Zen teacher who was holding Zazen in a garage down there in Kobenshi no Otogawa. And in fact, the Zendo in Los Altos is where the book Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind was recorded. These the famous pithy talks by Suzuki Roshi, recorded there. In '75, I met my first, well not first, but I met a Lama in San Francisco here and took refuge, became a formal Buddhist. Around that time I met Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche and studied with him. Wasn't really drawn to him as a personal teacher. He was a very outrageous character, just beyond convention completely. He drank, he smoked cigarettes. In order to find out what his students were doing with it, he dropped acid. And he actually found it very boring. He is famous for sleeping with some of his female students. What else? He could be very abrupt with someone. You could come for your interview and he might not even show up, or he'd show up drunk, or he might not say anything to you. Other times he might weep. It was all completely unique. The first time I saw him in close encounters was in 1975 in Santa Barbara, and he'd given a public talk in a church, and then afterwards we were all going to go hang out at the house somewhere, and so I went along and I sat down beside him. I didn't have anything to ask him, but I just sat near him and watched, and one by one students would come up and talk to him. And some students would come in and they would just sort of, the cat's meow, and it was almost like they were giving an audience to Trungpa Rinpoche. And he would sit there and look out the window and just ignore them. And other people would come and, oh, my lover has just died, or my mother has just died. And he would be totally there with them, completely, with tears in his eyes. And other people wanted to talk academics, and he'd talk academics with them. And it was, by this time I'd seen several different lamas, and most Tibetan lamas would be equally kind to everyone and be very generous and polite and, just sort of the same with everybody. And Trungpa Rinpoche was not the same with anyone. Even with, you might meet him twice and he'd be very different the second time than he was the first time. And extremely skillful, just extremely skillful at working with people. So my talk, I wanted to talk a little bit about sort of the history of how Shambhala arose from Buddhism. The Buddha taught what's called the three wheels, or the three yanas. We know them as Hinayana, or more often called Theravada, the lesser vehicle, the smaller vehicle, the lower vehicle, the first vehicle. And in that wheel, the Buddha taught that appearances, he taught about appearances as suffering, that there is suffering, there is dissatisfaction. And the Sanskrit word for this, dukkha, actually means to be dissatisfied. It doesn't mean to suffer. It means it's okay, but it's not quite right. The porridge is too hot, or it's too cold, or the car is not fast enough, or my boyfriend is not sexy enough, or it's like it's okay, but it's not really what I want. And then the second wheel, the Mahayana, the Buddha taught that appearances are emptiness. That these appearances that we think are so solid and real, this relationship, this car, this CD, this suit of clothes, what have you, that's the cat's meow, that's going to answer all my prayers. And it doesn't. It never does. It might for a little while. We get tired of it. It spoils, it grows old, it falls apart, it doesn't work anymore. We see through it, any number of things. And also the sense of emptiness is also that nothing is, and this is sort of, gets a little arcane, but if we take a chair and we say this is a chair, well, the chair is composed of wood and metal and nails and screws, and if we begin to take the chair apart, at what point does it stop becoming a chair? The same with our body. When we begin to get old and sick, then my hand doesn't work anymore. I was hit by a car 3 years ago, so my leg doesn't work so well. Well, at what point does it not become a body? And this body won't last very long either. And then the third wheel, the third turning of the wheel, which the Buddha taught near the end of his life, after he'd sort of actually become famous. People started coming to the Buddha. They heard about this guy, And he had some experience and they started coming to him. At that point, he started teaching what's called the Vajrayana. And in the third turning of the wheel, the Buddha taught appearances are wisdom. That things as they are, Suzuki Roshi used to say, things as it is, that things as they are, that is wisdom. We can work with it. We can actually use what's happening to us, our emotions, the conditions of our lives. We can actually apply those conditions and make use of it. That we don't have to discard anything, we don't have to manipulate anything, we don't have to change anything, we don't have to go on a diet, we don't have to dye our hair, we don't have to get that CD or that boyfriend or that book or that whatever that thing is that we think is going to, and just work with things as they are. And the Shambhala tradition comes out of both the Mahayana and the Vajrayana. It's based on the Theravada tradition, which is really about not causing more suffering. Sort of, there's this great 50s rock and roll song that had a line about clean up your own backyard. And that's sort of the first school of Buddhism, is to at least stop churning out more suffering for yourself and for others. In the Mahayana, we begin to work with the world and work with each other, and we see that our relationships are quite rich, and that we could actually begin to be more concerned about other people than myself. As my teacher, Sakyan Mipam, says, if you think about others, you're going to be miserable. If you think about yourself, you're going to be miserable. If you think about others, you'll actually be quite happy. Because we begin to think about opening the door for someone else, or bringing soup to someone who's sick. And we all know what that's like. Or taking care of someone. And it makes us feel good. We feel better. But all we think about is my CD and my book and my this and my that. There's no end to it. We can spend the rest of our lives doing that, and ultimately we're never going to be content or happy with that. So the Shambhala tradition arose primarily in Tibet. It's also appeared in other places, and it's really more about warriorship. It's about engaging in the world, being sort of fearless or courageous, or even having confidence about our relationship to the world, because it is a world of possibilities. Having the Vajrayana view, we see that everything has some rich potential to it. Even negative emotions, if you look at it closely, or sort of can slow your mind down to the point where you can experience sort of feeling angry or frustrated or worked up about something. You can see that there's a lot of energy there. It's really, and if we can tap into that pure energy, then we can use it. Rather than to say, I am angry, we can sort of experience the energy of that anger and see where it's coming from and what's underneath it and how to sort of work with it. So the first step of touching in to that energy of warriorship is, in Shambhala we call it the genuine heart of sadness. It's about being heartbroken about something, being very disappointed about something, having the experience of loss. And I think we've all had it. Certainly the gay community has had a lot of loss and a lot of sadness. But I think the world in general has a lot of loss and sadness. These days you can't get away from it. And rather than armoring our heart and shielding ourselves from that suffering or that loss, if we can actually open to it and feel it. And it doesn't mean that something has to break or someone has to die. It could be a piece of music. It could be a piece of art. It could be a conversation you've had with someone. It could be seeing a child on a swing and just how sweet that is. That can open us. And once we're open to that, then we can also be open to our fears and to all those sort of dark shadows that we want to sort of avoid, and we want to maybe put a smiley face or a happy face on conditions that aren't really so great. But we can actually open ourselves to that. And by doing that, we can actually enter into fear. We can have power over our fears. We can become fearless. Because we can see that even fear, even these dark, scary places, are places that, hey, it's really not, it's the, what do they say? The bark is worse than the bite. the reputation we have around our fears and our paranoias and uncertainties, we can actually embrace that and work with it. And by opening to that genuine heart of sadness, we can then work with others who are in a place where they're heartbroken, where they've had great loss. So again, the whole societal mix of relationships becomes more workable, because we find ourselves not having to shut down as often. Our comfort zone begins to grow. In one of his books, the Sakyong talks about the Goldilocks zone. He was studying astronomy, astronomy, and he said there's a Goldilocks zone in the solar system where human life, or life in general, is possible. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's not too bright, it's not too dark. And he used this analogy, and he talked about how we very often live our lives in the Goldilocks zone. We have to live in that area where we're comfortable and we feel safe. And we don't want to go someplace or be related to someone who, we're not really sure, where it doesn't feel confident or sure. So we begin to broaden or make that zone bigger and bigger and bigger to include these areas that aren't so positive or confident or certain. And then when we get to that point, we can actually have confidence in our experience. And this is where basic goodness comes in. And Sakyong talks about that basic goodness it's inherent. It's almost like it's the birthright of being born human. It's this quality. He has a story where two friends of his have recently had their first child. And so Sakyong, who was about to become a father himself, says, oh, well, how's the child doing and what's going on? And the parents say, well, this child seems to know exactly what to do and how to do it. And it's not something we taught him. He just does it himself. And the Sakyong says that that's a kind of basic goodness. That we all, at essence, we all want happiness. We want others who are important to us to be happy. We really, when we think about it, we don't really want anyone to suffer. We might not like George Bush or, any number of other people in our lives. And we might think that we're wishing them ill. But when you really think about it, we don't really want anyone to suffer. We're all kind of generally good-hearted people. And in the speed of ordinary life, we forget that. And we think, well, sure, that's true, but I have to get ahead at work. So in order to get ahead, I have to walk on someone, or I have to push someone past, or if another person cuts in line in front of me at the bank, I'm going to scream. There's that element of I just have to get through it. And then later, I'll relax and I'll be a nice person again. and that brings up this quality of genuine. Another hallmark of the Shambhala path is being genuine. That if somebody is irritating us, that we could actually say something about that. We don't have to keep it to ourselves and be quiet. We can actually say, excuse me, you're the third person to cut in line here. And, however you handle that, but it's about really being honest with ourselves and be honest about who we are and who we are in the world, and honest about our relationships and honest about what our dreams are, and really being more genuine. Because as we've seen in the world today, it's really not about being genuine. It's, that's actually considered, we could say, maybe not revolutionary, but it's certainly not sacred. The whole idea is about image and creating a persona and creating as Albert and I know, a Facebook page. Creating this face for the world. And being genuine is about just really being ourselves and honoring what's going on for us. And so through focusing on genuine and focusing on this understanding that all beings, all human beings, all animals have basic goodness. In classical Buddhism, it was called Tathata Garbha. Tathata means essence. Anyway, together it meant Buddha nature. That all beings have Buddha nature. All beings have the potential to be enlightened. And you could even say, some Tibetan traditions say all beings are Buddhas, pure and simple, and they've just temporarily forgotten. Again, there wasn't that much speed in old Tibet, but through the daily life, we just tend to forget that all beings have Buddha nature. And in the same way, all beings have this inherent birthright of basic goodness. And so by opening our heart and connecting with our own basic goodness and recognizing that everyone else out there also has basic goodness, and everyone else also has a tender heart of sadness. They also have had loss and heartbreak and so forth. Then the whole mix of it becomes much more workable, much more plastic and fluid. And then through sort of practicing that, and it doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't, you don't sort of read about this in the book or receive meditation instruction one day and then suddenly everything has changed. It's hard work, just like meditation is hard work. But, in meditation we come back to our posture again and again and again and again. We keep coming back to it, and one day you'll be meditating and suddenly you realize, oh, it's been 40 minutes. And, and I've been sitting here perfectly relaxed and still, and I haven't been thinking about something. I've just been very quiet and still. And in the same way, we begin to see this kind of arising of fearlessness, of warriorship in our daily lives. And actually being courageous enough to tell the truth to ourselves and to those around us. And to be able to work with people, to work with someone at the office or in a relationship or at the laundromat, who you run into, and every time you see that person, it's always trouble. And then suddenly one day you find, oh, I can actually talk to this person. And then things begin to shift, and it becomes much more plastic in the sense of fluid and changeable, workable. And then, actually, let me read something to you. So, this is my teacher, Sakyong Nipam Rinpoche, and this is his second public book called Ruling Your World. His first book was on meditation practice, and the second book he wrote to address he went on tour with his first book on meditation practice, which was called Turning the Mind into an Ally. And he wrote the meditation book for people who either experienced meditation practitioners or people who didn't know anything about meditation or had a taste but not really practiced very much. And he tried to come at it from the point of view of just mind training. Not Buddhism, not religion, not learning the Eightfold Path and all these different details of Buddhism, but just how to work with our mind and how to make our mind our friend. And when he went on the book tour, everybody was asking about family and work and relationships and sort of daily life. Okay, fine, I can learn to meditate, but then how do I handle, my crazy spouse or this nutty situation at work or school or what have you. And so he wrote Ruling Your World in response to that. And it's really about in Shambhala, the Shambhala tradition comes from, there was a king who went to the Buddha. Again, at the end of his life, the Buddha was teaching the Vajrayana, the third turning of the wheel. And he was primarily by that time teaching kings, leaders, and wealthy people. Again, because we see this in our world. You become famous and all of a sudden you're not relating to the people on the street, you're relating to the people in the boardrooms and the palaces and that. And so that was true for the Buddha. And this one king came to him and he said, well, I've got 8 wives and a huge kingdom and an army and I've got all these responsibilities and I can't just get up and leave. I have to stay here and do my job. So give me something on how I can practice that. And so the Buddha sent everyone out of the room and kept this king. This king was called Suchandra, or in Tibetan, Dala Sampo. And that guy was the first king of Shambhala. And the Buddha said, okay, here's what you do. And he gave him those teachings, and those teachings are known now as the Kala Chakra Tantra. If you've never heard of the Kala Chakra. But anyway, they were teachings that became the sort of core of Shambhala. And that's about governance and leadership and creating a good society. And those teachings, we actually, not only do we practice them, but we actually are sort of reinvigorating those teachings in this modern organization called Shambhala. And it's about how to create an enlightened society. How do we create relationships in our lives and our worlds that actually work and that benefit all of us? Not just me, not about my getting ahead, but about if I'm in a relationship with you, then let's all get ahead. What will work for all of us? And so this book, Ruling Your World, is really about that, about how can we engage life, engage all of the details of our lives in ways that actually benefit society. The tradition of rulership tells us that we are all meant to rule our world. We don't have to rule the entire world, but if we rule our own mind, and thus our environment, our peace and power does in fact begin to spread into the rest of the world. This energy is Lungta, wind horse, spiritual and worldly success. The teachings of Shambhala emphasize the reality that we all have basic goodness, and that the world we live in has basic goodness. However, in this dark age, there is a constant sense of fear and dissatisfaction. That negativity consumes us so that we cannot settle even in our own mind, let alone in our family or our society. When we are all saving the last piece of pie for ourselves, we are constantly undermining the possibility of creating stability and happiness. When we approach our planet with this attitude, the world is ruled by small-mindedness. Businesses and governments are crippled and ultimately fail because everyone is on the me plan. Being dragged around by emotions destabilizes our mind, our day, our life, and ultimately the welfare of our planet. That is the notion of suffering. The ruler looks at that suffering with the intention of doing something about it. In Shambhala, we vow to create an enlightened world. This vow reflects our aspiration to relieve suffering by awakening the world to its own potential.